Right. So today we're going deep on some pretty heavy stuff, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
We're going to be taking a deep dive into the philosophy of Gautama Buddha. You shared an excerpt from a Hindi YouTube lecture on Osho Rajneesh's interpretation of Buddha's teachings.
Yeah.
So we're going to be kind of exploring that.
Cool.
And kind of his unique perspective on, things like suffering, self-discovery, and the path to enlightenment.
Yeah, Osho's take on Buddha is, I think, really fascinating because he kind of brings in like a modern psychological lens to it all. And I think that can be really helpful for understanding these ancient ideas in a way that like resonates with us today,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's right from the start, the lecture kind of emphasizes how Buddha wasn't like your typical religious figure. He wasn't about blind faith. He was really encouraging people to question things and analyze and experience things for themselves.
Right. It's incredible that he even encouraged his followers to question his teachings on his deathbed.
Yeah.
Like, talk about walking the walk. Oh, yeah.
That really shows his commitment to truth through personal experience rather than just like accepting dogma.
Yeah, that's pretty radical for any time period, but especially like, thousands of years ago.
Right.
And that kind of leads us to, I guess, one of the core principles that we see in a lot of Buddha's teachings, which is this idea of the nature of suffering. He believed that, like, life inherently has suffering woven into it.
Yeah.
And it's caused by, our attachment to desires and things that we can't control.
Yeah, and the lecture uses a really powerful analogy to illustrate this. It's like a billet cart following the bullocks.
Okay.
So wherever the bullocks go, the cart just follows along behind them.
Right.
In the same way, Buddha is suggesting that wherever desire goes, suffering inevitably tags along.
Interesting.
And that really struck me because, it kind of suggests that we become almost like slaves to our desires, constantly chasing after them without even really realizing the suffering that they're dragging along with them. It makes you wonder how much of our suffering we're actually creating for ourselves.
Oh, yeah.
Just by being so attached to wanting things.
Absolutely. And the lecture makes the point that even in Buddha's time, people stressed about material possessions and status, just like we do today.
Of course.
They give this example of a rich man who is perfectly content with his house until a bigger, fancier one is built next door, and then suddenly he's miserable.
Yeah. It's like the saying, comparison is the thief of joy.
Totally.
We create our own suffering by constantly comparing ourselves and our possessions to others.
Right. And it's not necessarily the external circumstances themselves that cause us to suffer, but our internal reaction to them. We attach our happiness to these external factors, like possessions or status or relationships, and those things are constantly changing.
Yeah. So if the root of suffering is internal, how do we actually go about addressing it?
That's where Buddha's teachings get really interesting.
Okay.
He believed that true happiness and liberation from suffering come from within.
So it's about shifting our focus inward and detaching ourselves from that constant chase for external desires.
That sounds great in theory.
Yeah.
But like, how do we actually do that? It's not like we can just flip a switch and suddenly stop wanting things.
Well, one of the first steps is recognizing that we have a choice in how we respond to our desires.
Okay.
We don't have to be ruled by them.
Right.
The lecture uses the story of Buddha's disciple Purna, who chose to spread his teachings in these really challenging regions, facing hardship and difficulties with incredible courage.
So he was really putting these teachings into practice.
Exactly.
And not just, seeking comfort or validation.
Yeah, and that's where true strength and freedom come from.
Okay.
It's understanding that our happiness isn't dependent on external circumstances. It's about finding that inner peace and letting go of the illusion of control that we think we have over external things.
Okay. I'm starting to see how this all ties together, but I have to admit, like, the idea of letting go of control feels a little scary.
Yeah. Like, don't we need to have some control over our lives?
Of course we need to make choices and take action in the world.
Right.
But Buddha's is talking about a deeper level of letting go.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that true happiness can't be found by clinging to external things that are constantly changing.
The lecture gives another interesting example to illustrate this point. It's about this couple who constantly argued.
Right.
Even after the husband dies, the wife finds no solace.
It's like, even though she may have thought that the relationship was the source of her unhappiness, on a deeper level, her suffering wasn't truly rooted in the relationship itself, but in her own internal state.
So Buddha is suggesting that we need to take a step back and really examine our own minds and motivations
Hmm.
if we want to free ourselves from suffering?
He absolutely is. He was a big proponent of self-discovery and rejected the idea of blind faith.
Okay.
And the analogy they use in the lecture is really striking. It's like a traveler relying on an inaccurate map.
Oh, I like that.
You know,
Yeah.
it's like we need to venture out and experience the world for ourselves, not just rely on secondhand knowledge or assumptions.
And that's where the practice of mindfulness comes in.
Exactly.
Okay, so
Yeah.
how does mindfulness fit into all of this? Okay, so we're talking about how suffering comes from within
Right.
and how we create so much of it ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're getting into this idea of mindfulness.
Right.
So I'm curious to hear how mindfulness can help us, like, untangle ourselves from suffering.
Yeah, mindfulness is all about like paying attention to the present moment without judgment.
Okay.
It's about cultivating a deep awareness of what's happening within us, our thoughts, feelings, and sensations, but without getting carried away by them.
Gotcha. The lecture uses this really evocative image of travelers, you know, resting in a temporary shelter
Yeah.
to kind of illustrate the practice of mindfulness.
Right. It's a reminder that, everything in life is impermanent, always changing, just like those travelers will eventually move on. And we will too. Recognizing this can be a powerful motivator to like really savor each moment, appreciate the beauty in the present, and not get so caught up in clinging to things or wishing they were different.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
If we're always focused on the past or worrying about the future,
Right.
we miss out on the richness of what's happening right now.
Exactly. And that's where Osho's interpretation of Buddha's teachings kind of adds another layer.
Okay.
He really emphasizes this like analytical aspect of Buddhist philosophy. He reminds us that true understanding comes from like careful consideration and personal reflection, not just blind acceptance.
So it's not just about following a set of rules or beliefs,
Right.
but like really understanding the why behind them
Exactly.
and how they apply to our own lives.
Osho also highlights the psychological dimension of Buddhist teachings,
Okay.
particularly the role of ego, or ahamkara, as it's called in the lecture.
Okay, can you explain ahamkara a bit more?
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with that term.
Sure. So ahamkara is this key concept in Buddhist thought.
Okay.
And it basically refers to the ego or the sense of self. It's that part of us that's constantly seeking validation, comparing ourselves to others,
Right.
clinging to this idea of a separate me.
So the ego is kind of what drives a lot of our desires and attachments, which ultimately lead to suffering.
Precisely. Osho explains how the ego is constantly trying to protect itself,
Okay.
seeking pleasure and avoiding pain.
Right.
And in that process, it kind of perpetuates this cycle of desire and suffering.
The lecture gives this interesting example of this person who is trying to become a better person,
Right.
but ends up feeding their ego in the process.
It's a great example of how tricky the ego can be.
Yeah.
We can think we're doing something for the right reasons,
Mhm.
but if we look closely, we might find that it's actually motivated by this desire for praise or recognition.
It's almost like our egos have a way of disguising themselves,
Totally.
making us think we're doing things for noble reasons, when really it's all about self-gratification.
That's why self-awareness and honesty are so important in this journey.
Yeah.
Osho encourages us to question our assumptions and like really dig deep into our motivations, even the ones that seem positive on the surface.
It's powerful insight.
Yeah.
It makes you reevaluate your own intentions.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of Osho's perspective.
Okay.
He challenges us to look beyond surface level understanding and really grapple with the complexities of the human mind and Buddha's teachings.
It's definitely a lot to process.
Yeah.
But it's also incredibly liberating
Oh, totally.
to consider that we have the power to like break free from these patterns of suffering.
Absolutely. And that's where the true essence of Buddha's message lies.
Yeah.
In empowering us to create a life filled with peace and wisdom and compassion.
So how do we even begin to unravel these deeply ingrained patterns?
Well, Buddha emphasized that the journey starts with understanding the true nature of suffering.
Okay, and that brings us back to the analogy of the chariot wheel following the oxen.
Right.
Suffering follows desire.
We can't escape suffering as long as we're attached to these like fleeting desires and external circumstances.
Right. The lecture also emphasizes that, suffering is a universal human experience, regardless of time or circumstance.
It's fascinating to consider that, while technology and social structures have evolved,
Yeah.
the fundamental human condition remains remarkably similar.
Right.
The anxieties and insecurities we face today are echoes of those experienced by people centuries ago.
They use that great example of how, A rich man's happiness is shattered when someone builds a bigger house next to his,
Right.
you know.
It's a perfect illustration of how our perception of lack and comparison, not external circumstances, is often the root of suffering.
So if suffering comes from within, it stands to reason that the solution must also come from within.
Precisely, Buddha taught that true happiness and liberation come from understanding our own minds and cultivating inner peace through practices like mindfulness and meditation.
And the lecture goes deeper into ahankara, that sense of self or ego.
Right.
Explaining how it clings to external validation and constantly seeks gratification,
Right.
perpetuating this cycle of desire and suffering.
Osho challenges us to question the very notion of the ego and explore the possibility of transcending its limitations.
Letting go of the ego seems incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
It feels so central to who we are.
It's certainly not easy, but Buddha's teachings offer a path toward gradually detaching ourselves from the ego's grip.
Can you give an example of what that might look like?
Absolutely.
Well,
Remember the story of Buddha's disciple Purna, who chose to spread his teachings in these challenging regions,
yeah.
facing hardship with courage and compassion.
He really embodied Buddha's teachings.
Exactly. Purna embodies the inner strength and freedom that come from genuine understanding.
Yeah.
He didn't seek comfort or validation, but embraced challenges as opportunities for growth and enlightenment.
It's inspiring to think that true peace and happiness are possible, even amidst difficult circumstances.
Absolutely. It's not about avoiding challenges, but about changing our relationship to them.
Right. And the lecture also talks about taking responsibility for our own suffering.
Yeah, Asha reminds us that we have a choice in how we respond to external events. He uses this powerful example of two psychologists encountering this rude individual.
Okay.
One gets angry and upset, while the other simply cleans himself off and moves on, recognizing that the other person's behavior is their own problem.
It's such a great illustration of how we can choose to detach ourselves from the negativity of others
Totally.
and cultivate inner peace, even when faced with challenging situations.
It emphasizes the power of mindfulness and conscious awareness in breaking free from these reactive patterns and choosing a more peaceful and compassionate way of being.
It's incredible to think about the profound impact our internal state has on our experiences.
It truly is. The lecture reminds us that we are not victims of circumstance, but creators of our own reality, both internally and externally.
So what are some practical steps we can take to cultivate this inner peace and detachment?
Well, Buddha emphasized the importance of mindfulness, paying attention to the present moment without judgment.
Like that image of the travelers passing through a temporary shelter.
Yes, it's a poignant reminder of the impermanence of life. We're all just passing through, and it's up to us to make the most of each precious moment.
It's a call to wake up from the slumber of our habitual patterns and truly embrace the richness of life.
Precisely, Osho challenges us to question our assumptions, examine our motivations, and cultivate a deep awareness of our inner world.
It's a journey of self-discovery that requires courage, honesty, and a willingness to let go of the illusions that keep us trapped in suffering.
But it's a journey well worth taking, leading to a life filled with peace, wisdom, and compassion.
The lecture uses a striking analogy of this man buying a compass with a mirror on the back.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It beautifully illustrates the importance of balancing external exploration with internal reflection.
Right.
The compass guides us through the world, but the mirror reminds us to look within and understand ourselves.
It's like we need both the map and the mirror to truly find our way.
Absolutely. And that's what makes Buddha's teachings so profound. They offer this comprehensive approach to navigating life's complexities,
Yeah.
both internal and external.
It's about finding that balance between engaging with the world
Right.
and cultivating inner peace and clarity.
It's about recognizing that true happiness and liberation come not from chasing external desires, but from understanding the nature of our own minds and cultivating a deep sense of inner peace and fulfillment.
It's a powerful message that resonates across cultures and centuries.
It's a timeless wisdom that continues to offer guidance and inspiration for those seeking a more meaningful and fulfilling life.
It's definitely given me a lot to think about.
Yeah.
I can see how these ideas, while ancient, are still incredibly relevant today.
Yeah, it really is amazing how, these teachings from thousands of years ago can still feel so relevant to our lives today.
Totally.
As we kind of wrap up this deep dive into Buddha's philosophy, is there a key takeaway
That you hope listeners will kind of hold on to.
Yeah, I think the most important message is that true happiness and freedom from suffering aren't found in external circumstances,
Right.
but within ourselves.
Yeah.
It's about transforming our internal landscape rather than trying to change the world around us.
Yeah, the lecture really drove home the point that we have a choice in how we respond to the inevitable challenges that life throws our way.
Exactly. And that choice comes down to cultivating awareness, understanding the workings of our minds, embracing practices like mindfulness and compassion.
That image of the travelers finding temporary shelter really stuck with me, you
Yeah.
know?
It serves as such a powerful reminder of the impermanence of everything.
Mhm.
Just like those travelers, we're all just passing through this life,
Right.
and it's a call to make the most of each moment and to appreciate the beauty of this fleeting existence.
This deep dive has given me a whole new perspective on Buddhist teachings
Yeah.
and how Osho interprets them for a modern audience.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that exploring different interpretations is so valuable
Yeah.
when it comes to understanding any philosophy,
For sure.
especially one as rich and nuanced as Buddha's.
I especially appreciate how Osho encourages us to think critically
Mm.
and question everything, even Buddha's own
He
words.
challenges us to go beyond blind faith and seek truth through our own direct experience,
Yeah.
which I think is the essence of true enlightenment.
So for our listeners who are intrigued by Buddha's philosophy and want to explore further, what would you recommend?
Well, I would suggest starting with some of Buddha's original teachings, like the Dhammapada or the Sutta Nipata,
Okay.
and then explore different interpretations from teachers like Osho or Thich Nhat Hanh.
So it's really about finding what resonates with you personally
Right.
and discovering how you can apply these ancient teachings to your own life.
Absolutely. And remember, self-discovery is a lifelong journey.
Mhm.
There's always more to learn and explore, both within ourselves and in the world around us.
So if true happiness and freedom from suffering come from within, what's one small step
Yeah.
that our listeners can take today
Mm-hmm.
to cultivate a little more inner peace and detachment from those external desires?
Even just a few minutes of mindfulness each day can make a big difference.
Okay.
Simply notice your breath, your thoughts, and your feelings without judgment.
Right.
It's a powerful first step toward greater self-awareness and inner peace.
What a wonderful way to end this deep dive.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for guiding us through this thought-provoking exploration.
It was my pleasure.
And to all our listeners, until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.